Welcome to another edition of the Gospel Mailbox. Today's lesson is titled Recovered Faith. And the text is taken from Luke, the 8th chapter, 26 through 36. And those verses read as follows. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot, had kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man with whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Now, going back to the beginning of this section of Scripture, and before we go too far into it, let me just point out that this story is told in virtually all of the Gospels. And sometimes this place is referred to as Gerasenes, and sometimes it's referred to as Gadarenes. No problem with that. The same place can be called two different names. For example, my home is located in the Chattanooga area, in the Lookout Valley area. Sometimes it's called Tiftonia. Sometimes it's called Lookout Valley. The place doesn't change, just how you refer to it, depending on what people are familiar with. That may occasionally change, so it's not that big of a deal. And that's the same way with Gerasenes and Gadarenes. There's also two. We know from one of the gospel accounts that there was actually two men there that were demon-possessed. Brother Luke doesn't bother talking about the other one, just the primary one. And going back to the beginning of this section of Scripture, in the 26th verse of the 8th chapter of Luke, they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. Now, we're still within the confines of Israel. This has significance because we know that later in the story, there are people who are taking care of a herd of pigs, swine. And that would have been very looked down upon and prohibited for Jewish people to be a caretaker for pigs. Those were considered to be unclean animals. And down to the 27th verse, when Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but he had lived in the tombs. Now, again, this story talks about even more uncleanness. We know from the law that it was considered to be a bad thing for someone to be, it was ceremonially unclean to touch a dead body. So for this man to be living in the tombs meant that he was continuously being ceremonially unclean. And also, too, he had torn his clothes and was running around naked among the tombs. And acting very crazy and out of his head. These demons have been pushing him to complete total insanity. And so we see that. And he was suffering, considerably suffering inside this demon possession. Now down to the 28th verse, when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." Now, these demons, because they were fallen angels, this demon knew exactly who Jesus was. Because he had seen the pre-incarnate Christ, the living Son of God, the Son of the Trinity. He had seen Jesus. He knew who Jesus was. He recognized Jesus. And he was begging Jesus not to torture him and pleading for mercy. And going down to the 29th verse, when Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, talking about the man who is demon possessed, many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. And so we see a reference here of something that folks who have come face to face with demon-possessed people tell the story of how that people who are demon-possessed oftentimes experience superhuman power, where the demon infuses them with rage and anger, and they are able to do amazing feats of strength. And that's what had happened to this demon-possessed man. They had tried to, the people around him had tried to protect him and keep him from hurting himself. And they had chained him up, and the man had broken loose from the chains. And Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of this man. And the spirit did not want to be thrown into the abyss, the place of reserved for the demons and for the devil and his angels. He did not want to be thrown into that abyss any sooner than he knew that he was going to be ultimately heading there. So Jesus was being pleaded with not to throw him into the abyss. And down to the 30th verse, Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. Now this term legion was taken from the Greek army, where they would have a legion of soldiers. And this demon was calling itself Legion because there was many of them. And most likely the way that was working, there was like a chief honcho demon, and he had a lot of underlings that were in him that was possessing these two men in the tombs of Gadarene. And the head honcho was calling himself Legion because he had all these demons along with him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them into the abyss. So we see that where Jesus was being begged not to throw them into the abyss, we know ultimately they're going to go into the abyss. We know that from the book of Revelations. And going down to the 32nd verse, a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permissions. So we know that there's a large herd of pigs on the hillside, and the demons wanted to go into these pigs, and then Jesus gave them permission to go into those pigs. So we see how that oftentimes these things work. We know that Satan is a liar and the father of lies, and he's the destroyer, the killer, the murderer, the destroyer, the destruction. And that is oftentimes how this works. And you look in the book of Job, and it works the same way in the book of Job, where Satan was going to and fro, and God gave Satan permission to reach out and harm Job. And it wasn't God harming Job, it was God granting permission for Satan to harm Job. And people will talk, and when bad things, horrible things happen, they will act like God did it. And that's not the case. God is not the one who makes you sick. God is not the one who kills little babies and lets them have crib deaths and that kind of thing. That God is not the author of that. Now he does have to give permission to Satan to destroy and kill and make people sick. He does have to give permission, but God's not the one doing that. It's actually Satan who is the destroyer who's actually doing that. So we see that this is another instance of how that works, where Satan, this demon, this honcho demon, Legion, and this legion of demons asked permission to be able to go into these pigs, and Jesus gave them permission to do so. And then down to the 33rd verse, when the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. And so we see how these pigs just couldn't stand those demons neither, and they had to get some kind of relief and headed out and drown themselves. They'd rather be dead than be demon possessed. And we also see, too, how the demons have this suicidal spirit to them. And I think that there's a lot of times where mental illness, not all the time. Now, they are physical mental illnesses that are biological, where maybe people have tumors or some kind of chemical imbalance. That's one thing. But I also believe that there are instances where people are possessed by a demon, and the demon causes them to act in very irrational ways and causes them to commit suicide and that kind of thing. And I believe it's sometimes that is demonic possession that does that. And we see how that the effects on these poor men in the tomb, at the tombs, that were possessed by this big, huge legion of demons, We see how they were destructive to themselves, and then we see when the demons went out and into those pigs, how that they were destructive with the pigs too. And we see how that the devil and people that'll sit there and play around with witchcraft and Ouija boards and astrology and all that mess and get themselves opened up, and they'll take drugs. A lot of people don't realize this, but the word for sorcery in the New Testament is the Greek word pharmaceutos, which is with the same word we get pharmacy from. And oftentimes the people are they use drugs. When they take drugs, it opens them up to demonic oppression and opens up that gateway into Lucifer, and people get possessed by taking these mind-altering drugs. And anyway, so let me just caution you about that, because when you read the story of these men at the tomb, these tombs and Gadarenes or Gerasenes, however you want to say it, you see how the destruction from the devil is so strong, and you are opening yourself up to extreme destruction by fooling with this stuff. And that would be, like I said, drugs, witchcraft, the astrology, which is witchcraft, having these kind of seances, and all this mess will open you up to the devil and let the devil get a hold of you. And I think even watching some TV shows, some movies and some TV shows opens people up to attack from the devil. You don't need to be watching something where they're sitting there worshiping Satan. You need to run from that. You need to avoid that, because it can open you up to attack from Lucifer. And Lucifer is the author of destruction and lies. And then going down to the 35th verse, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man with whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. So we see how that Jesus had cast those demons out, and the man was in his right mind. These men were in their right mind, and they were healed, and things were right. And every time when Jesus gets a hold of people, it is amazing when you see the change that occurs in people's lives. And that's what was happening to these men that had been destroying themselves at the tomb. And they were in their right mind. And down to the 36th verse, those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. So the fame of Jesus had went all around. Now let me encourage you that if you don't know Jesus, that you seek Jesus out, and he can put your life right, just like these men who were possessed by the legion of demons.